and we'll get started in just a minute.
I'm firing up the YouTube.
Firing up the YouTube.
I'm going to fill up my water bottle.
All right, so one more time, if you want to let us know where you're coming from, if you're on Zoom, if you're on YouTube, unfortunately, we can't see those comments. Also looking forward to hearing what aspect of this conversation you'd love to hear and contribute to tonight, because an hour isn't very much time and there's probably a million things we could talk about. So if you'd like to provide us some direction, we always appreciate that. Otherwise, we're really good at just like going off on our little rants, and we're happy to do that. I thought I would pick a card, though. That's usually something we do. My connection was so bad on Sunday that I didn't get a chance to do that, but I thought for the full moon in Virgo today, I would do that, and it would give us maybe some direction. So this is a new deck for me. I'll show you. It's called Divine Circus. Really fun. And so just take a moment, if you would, only a few seconds, and just center yourself into your own body. It's for most of us late in the day, so maybe you've had a busy day doing lots of things, kids running around, whatever. So just take a moment. If you can, shut your eyes. If you can't, that's great as well. Just taking some breaths on this full moon that has a lot going on. And coming into your body, just feeling whatever it is you feel without judgment. Arriving in your physical form, in the room you're in the place you're in the house you're in, whatever the case may be. Just calling yourself back from all of the things that attract our attention all day long, from kids to clients to social media. Just making an intention right now to call back the parts of yourself so you can fully arrive for this exploration and conversation tonight. And from that place, I'll choose a card for us. As always, take it if you wish, discard it if you don't want it, don't care. I'll read from the book because this is a new deck for me. It's 43. It's called Date with Destiny. And I'll share with you what that's about. I'll give the short version, since we want to get on to our prenatal care here. Out of the ethers and into your life, she arrives now because you have a date with destiny. She is a mysterious creature. Her ways are wild and her guidance is true. She may create chaos from which a new order can emerge, but there is no need to fear. She has come to inspire, uplift, and direct you. So the oracle of this card means that all bets are off. Nothing is held sacred and anything can happen. If you are a control freak, this will probably scare you witless. So you need to know something important. You can trust in Destiny's interventions on your behalf, even if her work seems to be causing your best intentions to go astray. So basically, not being able to control what destiny is. And the affirmation for this card being, my date with destiny is full of the most fun, joy, passion, purpose, and play that I can have while being me. So this may apply. I like the passion, purpose, and play. And I think that actually factors really well into prenatal care. It should be all of those things, in my humble opinion. So thank you, deck of cards. That was fun.
That is fun.
Yeah, it's a really fun deck. It looks a little like dark at first, but once you kind of get into it, it's pretty cool. All right. Well, another official welcome if you hopped on in the last few minutes. We are talking about radical prenatal care. And I don't know where we'll go with that, whatever that can mean.
Did you already say where people are calling from or zooming in from when I was getting my water?
Well, I see a lot of nice comments of where people are from. So if you want to add to that and you're on Zoom, go for it. We can't see the comments on YouTube. And yeah, there's some great topics and questions there as well. So I'm going to take a look.
Taking a look. A mix of birth workers, doulas, midwives, mamas. Jenna, if you feel like saying any more over in the chat, we certainly are open to making this as useful for the people who took time out of their day to show up. So you said, I'm pregnant with my second and inspired by intentional versus routine prenatal care, especially as it exists outside of the medical model. Let us know if there's anything specific here wanting to explore more.
Well, to get us started, I shared this already in part in the newsletter today, so you may have seen it, but back in the good old days when I was licensed as a midwife and trained as a midwife through apprenticeship even, there was a very practical way that prenatal care looked in my apprenticeship. And so, as is so natural for us when we're in that role as student, we kind of carry on what we've been taught. And I don't regret that. I think I learned what is really solid prenatal care, like the things that can be done, the things that can be offered, even down to some of the counseling aspects, like the typical conversations or questions that we might ask women. So I'm super grateful for that. However, when I gave my license back to the state of Arizona about 11 years ago, it was so refreshing and it was scary and it was a lot of things. But in the face of prenatal care, I realized I had the opportunity to really invent that for myself as a midwife and what felt important to me. And of course, at that point, I had had 6 babies of my own. So I also knew as a pregnant woman what I wanted and what I didn't need. And I remember coming back into midwifery at that point without a license, and something had radically shifted just because of that. I remember having even a repeat client at that point who suddenly changed up how she wanted prenatal care, just kind of coincidentally. And of course, it's not really a coincidence, but I remember that being really inspiring and sort of scary. Like, oh my God, if we don't have to do any of these things, how do we trust women to know? And what do we offer when? And, essentially, what is prenatal care? It really wiped the slate clean for me. And again, that was super exciting. And I feel like I've been exploring that ever since. And, I don't have the final answer at this point either, but prenatal care, from my perspective as a midwife, looks radically different than it did for me, at least that many years ago. So happy to share about that, but I think we have all kinds of things to talk about tonight.
Do you feel like part of that change too came from the experience of with True's pregnancy, doing your own, I guess that was the first one I saw you go through. Was that the first time that you didn't do sort of more typical check-ins?
Yeah, I mean, True's pregnancy, which was my 6th, was essentially a free birth. And before that, my 5 before that, I had different experiences. My first was a hospital birth, and I had midwives for the second one, for the third one, for the fourth one, for the fifth one. So, right, it was my first experience not having someone else. I think guide at best. I think guiding is awesome, but also on like the flip side, structuring it for me and saying like this is what happens, and here's the chart. I knew my body so well at that point, and it's continued of course through my other pregnancies, that I don't bother personally with a lot of the stuff because I know my own self. And it's led to whatever research there might be around things like urinalysis, right? Like, is that useful? Why are we putting women through these protocol other than licensing, right? If we don't have that to concern ourselves with, then like it's wide open and what is important and what is not. And, I'll say I have a story super recently where someone came to me very late at about 33 weeks of pregnancy, hadn't done any clinical prenatal care. I'm sure she did wonderful things for herself. But when she showed up at 33 weeks with no clinical care, she was very ill and had very high blood pressure. So I'm also not saying that we throw it all out and none of that is important. That's not at all what we're saying. We're saying that how can we use this intentionally? What do women want? What does each individual woman need? And going from there.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that I guess something that one of the things that sparked that question for you was when I'm thinking about prenatal care and the way that it's changed for me over the course of like learning alongside you in my apprenticeship years and then on my own in the last number of years here, I guess going on 6, is my own pregnancy experiences and doing my own prenatal care. And especially after having my second child, Arrow, who's going to be 4 pretty soon. And I didn't live even in the same city as Marin for that pregnancy. So I really didn't have other people to really feel my belly other than my student. And so it was really all me. And as I was going through that pregnancy and then in the afterward, the postpartum, as I got back into midwifery work pretty quickly, I think I was at a birth like 6 weeks after he was born. I just had this feeling of like, why am I doing it this way? Like, I didn't do this. I didn't do this for myself. I didn't hire someone to do this stuff for me. Like, I didn't think it was necessary. And so, like, what am I doing sitting here? Even, I don't know, like I just did a prenatal this morning and I still did the like, do you want me to take your blood pressure? And she did. So it's not even that it's more the spirit and like the ethos of the sit down and how that's shifted for me. And again, I think that I had the biggest shift after my second pregnancy when it was like, wait a minute. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And just reshaping sort of how what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like, just reshaping the relationship between me and my clients as a result of those sorts of, revelations.
Years ago, and I'm sure you remember this, Margot, we taught a radical prenatal care workshop in Phoenix. And gosh, I mean, it had to be 10 years ago, if not more. I can't quite remember. But that was one of our first stabs at like getting pregnant women together and trying to illustrate that prenatal care has a million different parts. And for each of us, those may even be different. Although at that time in that workshop, we had narrowed down some of the categories just for making it simple. So, nourishment, for example, like what does that mean? Are we only talking about food? How else do we nourish ourselves? And again, everybody's different. So maybe it's a spiritual community, maybe it's a spiritual practice. How does spirituality or, having a religious focus change the pregnancy? How does that change prenatal care? From connection with the partner, connection with the baby, other children involved, the community involved, like there's a million different categories to look at. And at the time, we had women kind of make this flower, like draw a flower, and it had petals. And each petal was kind of like one category for them that they wanted to focus on as a pregnant woman. And that was, that's considered prenatal care. And I don't think that's like revolutionary at this point to anyone here, probably. But I think it is in some places to imagine that, it's not something someone does for you, that prenatal care is something the woman takes on in terms of her lifestyle, her growth, her, moving through trauma, her, transmuting ancestral patterns. Like there's a million ways it can look. And that as the midwife, I think I prefer to be the support and space holder for whatever she determines that prenatal care is. So I started talking about clinical information when we first started. And again, I think that can have a piece, and it does have a piece for many women that I see, but it's not the primary piece. Usually it's very self-directed, and prenatal care is what happens every minute of a pregnancy, every day of a pregnancy, outside of, right, the 1 to 2 hours that as a midwife we might get to spend with someone. So I'm kind of looking over Jenna's question, or I'm not sure if it's Gina or Jenna. I apologize. But she's talking about balancing the integration of pregnancy as a part of everyday life, which is what I'm saying, and maybe having a different focus that isn't just physical and medical. And I'll stop in a minute, but I think part of the way that a midwife can be really supportive and effective, and again, if people want to do it all alone, meaning their pregnancy, whatever that means for them, I mean, there's a lot of that out there, go for it. But I think this sort of midwifery supports women in introspection that they might not know to have. So the way I like to explain it is for any of us, there will be blind spots in our awareness. And if we are only having our first baby, there's going to be many blind spots. We don't know what we don't know. So the point of a midwife isn't to tell someone what to do or to manage them necessarily, but to be the one kind of with the flashlight that can point out possible things to look at, places to be with, figurative places to sit, emotional blocks. That is what, presently it's looking like to me. And again, where I think whoever's in that role, maybe it's a doula, whoever's in that role can be really useful.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I don't know that I've ever said it quite this way, but it's like prenatal care is how somebody meets their needs in pregnancy. And so I feel like a lot of the time when I'm sitting with somebody, it's this, at least initially, it's a query into what do I need in pregnancy? Because a lot of the time people don't even know that yet. And like you said, Maren, there's a lot of blind spots. And so I use a document questionnaire, whatever we want to call it, form that Maren had created with my clients too, which is like a bazillion questions about all sorts of different aspects of your life, from what's your relationship like with your mom, to do you have a history of sexual assault, do you have any spiritual preferences that you're coming into this pregnancy with, like all of those things. I think I printed one out today and it was like 15 pages long that a client had submitted. And so looking at that and sort of sitting with it, and I'm not a therapist, but getting a sense of like, what are those places that somebody is already knows they want to work on or look at, places they know they want support, and then where are the places that they maybe need some support that they don't even realize it, and then we kind of go from there in an organic way. And I think she had asked about tools and stuff. I really have gotten interested in guided meditation, and that's sometimes a fancy word, or not a fancy word. It's more like a a mainstream word sometimes for like shamanic journeying. And so that was a skill that I focused on last year, and I'm still trying to build and want to use more with clients to, yeah, get at some of that stuff under the surface so that they can integrate it. While also not ignoring, like Maren was saying too, not ignoring the clinical stuff. And if somebody's actually ill in front of you, or how the physical manifestations of some of those maybe long-standing or even ancestral imbalances are presenting in the here and now, like you can't just ignore that either. So it's a both and.
And as far as the tools specifically, we will be doing that in our Elevate program, talking about ways to set the space, ways to lead women into their nervous systems more, actually practicing meditations and other ways of, again, kind of setting the energy, which is really important, I think, so that it's the most supportive environment for this really deep process that she is wanting to be witnessed in as she's initiated into it. So the birth is an initiation, but really the pregnancy is too. And for some women, it just rocks their world. Like if they're really open to changing and growing, I think the babies coming through especially are really requiring women to step it up and meet their vibration. So again, it's not my job to make that happen, but just being someone that can see kind of what's what and holding the space for the woman to do that on her own. So there's a lot of detail there as to how to do that, what tools to use, when to do that, and also, into the ceremony of the pregnancy experience. I think for me, that's a really important part of prenatal care that most of the women I serve are really, really into. I mean, obviously, or they'd probably find someone else. So finding new ways to celebrate that, to make things special, to respect their own spiritual beliefs, wherever they're coming from. Something as simple as, having a group blessing of herbs is something I've been doing recently. So some really simple ideas to, not make it inauthentic. Like if that's not where someone's at, they're not going to want that. But if they are, it's just a way of kind of drawing everybody closer. And, I have 2 students. So between the 3 of us and the woman that's sitting in front of us, I love to think and feel that it's a circle, that we're creating a circle of women for this woman every time she comes for a prenatal visit. So yeah, it's really just beyond the clinical, beyond even the counseling, and it feels like a sacred circle. So not saying everyone has to do it that way, but that's kind of where I've landed at the moment and the kind of things we're going to share in the Elevate program. And that program is for midwives that are out there doing this work.
So Maren, I think this is a really excellent example that will highlight more of what we're talking about. Carrie Ann asked, what are labs that y'all would suggest I order for myself?
You want me to answer that?
I guess I I was like role playing there for a second, but no, I can. So this is such a great jumping off point, I think, for this conversation, which I'm not going to give you a black and white answer, because that's sort of the whole point when we're talking about radical prenatal care, is that there's not a black and white answer. I could not tell you, not knowing anything about you or your history, what I would suggest. And even if you were sitting in front of me and I did know your history, I wouldn't necessarily frame it in those terms as like, I suggest you get these things. Although, sometimes I do slip into that language a little bit more when something's like a more clear choice. But when it's not a clear choice, which 99% of the time it's not, I really try to hold space for like, this is all you. And not from like I want to be unbiased. Like I sort of hate that word. It's more just like, this is your responsibility, and I don't want to take that responsibility. because that's doing a disservice to you. So anyways, like I said, this is a really good question to sort of highlight some of the pieces when we're talking about radical prenatal care. So if someone was sitting with me, like this actually did happen today, it's like, oh, hey, like when's the last time you got some labs? And she had them pre-pregnancy, and we looked at them, we looked over them. There were some that were on the lower side, almost out of range. And we talked about like, what have you been doing to maybe boost her iron levels were a little bit low. So her hemoglobin was on the lower side and her ferritin was low and blah, 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 blah. So we talked about what she's been doing, how she's feeling, what her symptoms are, or lack of symptoms are. And also taking into account, like, she's still nauseous in her first trimester. So she hasn't really been doing like iron supplements, and, there's controversy over whether or not those are even a good idea. Right. And so I present all of that to people. And this is where like the context is so important. And, typically at a first prenatal visit, and this was her initial visit with me, on paper, at least, we've seen each other other times, but if I was a routine midwife, I would say, oh, here's your lab slip. And it would just already have all of the labs preloaded onto it. You'd be getting a CBC, right? You'd be getting, STI testing, gonorrhea, chlamydia. You probably do a urine culture, this and that, right? So I give my clients, this is actually something new in the last year. I send them before their visit, and I also have it if they want to look at it when they're sitting with me. But before the visit, I send them like, these are the first trimester labs that are out there and are part of typical care. And here's what they are actually looking for and how this may pertain to you or may not pertain to you. And at the end of the day, it's your choice. So often, and I don't think she had a chance to read that yet, but in other circumstances where someone has, they're like, oh yeah, I read through that whole thing. And I'll say, oh, that's cool. Do you have any questions about it? And then it'll say yes or no, and we'll talk through it. And then if they want something, I get out the lab slip and I'm like, cool, which ones do you want me to order you? And then they literally tell me, and I check off the boxes and give it to them. Yeah. You could also, and I have sort of a unique circumstance in that I can order labs through the hospital here, which is like sort of insane. But, if I didn't have that, then they could also just go self-order, right? So I hope that answered your question in a philosophical sense, at least. Anything you want to add, Mirren?
Taking responsibility for whether it's lab work or what someone would want to know via ultrasound. I think it's really important to distinguish that radical prenatal care, or whatever you want to call it, isn't anti-medical. It isn't anti-technology. That is not part of the definition of autonomy. Autonomy is choosing what you want. And so I think people can be confused by that. Even people I work with occasionally, if they're brand new, they kind of think like, oh, that isn't allowed. And it's like, no, you should determine with support, with information, with whatever I have to add, if you want it, if it's appropriate for you. So with something like lab testing, it's like, well, what do you want to know? What are you looking to know? Same with ultrasound. What are you looking to know? And let's talk about that. And, will you perhaps reach that goal of knowing, yes or no? What other factors may play in? So it's way more than informed consent. I think it's way more than informed choice, even. These are very deep discussions in a lot of cases. And the other thing I'd add, and, I want to be careful like how I say this, but after 15 years of doing this, there are so many ways to gather information about a person. And lab work is definitely one of those. But for me to recommend something like that, it's never routine. It's because you know this woman so well, and you know what she's eating, and you know what quality she's eating, and you know how often she's eating, and you know her history, and you're in front of her and you can gauge a sense of health, right? So you have all of these tools that would lead you to perhaps recommend rare lab work. The woman I was speaking of earlier who came in not well with high blood pressure, that was my immediate recommendation, and I did not apologize immediately. Metabolic labs would be really helpful in this case. Are you willing to go get those? So it wasn't surprising to me when those came back not looking great, right? So after time, you end up using what you know to confirm what you see and hear in front of you. And so if you are a newer midwife, I would say take the opportunity to order those labs. Like, not, you're not forcing anyone, but definitely use that information to learn and see if it matches what you've seen in front of you. That's how you learn, rather than this like routine, like sort of waste of money, waste of time thing. Because most pregnant women that we see, at least, luckily, are pretty healthy, right? So, anyway, that's a long blab about labs.
Yeah, and there was a request to see such a list, and we have a version of it in 13 Moons, which is indiebirth.org/13 moons. I'm also going to paste my very ugly Google Doc link over in the meeting chat to my one that I hand out to my clients if you want to take a peek at it. So sorry if you're on YouTube. You could always email me if you want to get at it or get into 13 Moons for that, along with so many other resources for radical prenatal care, which I don't think that was necessarily like what we were thinking about when we picked this topic. And but it obviously relates to mamas and doulas and midwives. And yeah, so quick plug for 13 Moons as well. If you're on here and you're pregnant and want like the most epic comprehensive resource pile to dig through. I have repeat clients right now going through it a second time, which is cool because they're like, oh yeah, the first time it was great, I learned a lot, and this time I'm able to like learn even more and go deeper. So it's like the gift that keeps on giving, and it's pay what you can. So do that. And if you're a doula or a midwife, you, not to totally like derail our conversation here, but since I'm thinking about it, we have a lot of birth workers who make 13 Moons like a requirement for their clients because it is so inexpensive, and it's pay what you can with a minimum of $30, which just like covers our ad fees essentially. And it makes your life so much easier. And some doulas, for sure, I don't know about midwives, but I know some doulas who include it actually for their clients. So they like buy it for them with their email address, the client's email address, and include it in their package fee because it's like so much simpler than teaching your own childbirth ed course. Okay, sidebar over, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, two things I can think of offhand in that course that relates to this discussion, though, that I think they are really cool. One, we have kind of a template for an interview with your mom about your own birth. And we actually have our midwifery school students do that, our doula students do that, because, yeah, until we kind of walk through our own trauma, it's hard to support people. But if you're a pregnant mama, that interview template is in there, and that might be really insightful. The feedback has been for years that it's really helpful. And then there's some other resources. There's a video on sexuality and spirituality in birth that people really seem to like. And again, I think it's just putting these topics out there as part of the pregnancy experience and not defining them for someone, but opening the door, so to speak, to spirit babies and conversations with a soul and things like that that are also part of prenatal care for so many women. All of this is in 13 Moons, the link that Margot posted. It's indiebirth.org/13 moons.
I'll put it again. It really is so excellent. And something that you were just saying made me think about, I guess you were talking about sexuality and spirituality, and for some reason that made me start thinking about like chakras and energy and all of these things. And I think something that I want to impart to the midwives who do take our Elevate program, and this is like the simple version and not the 6-week version that you'll get there, but is that we have what I was gonna say we have to, but what I have found useful in my sort of experimentation, and I very much do feel like I'm in an experimentation phase, is, and I think I learned this from you, Maren, in different ways, is that certain points in gestation, so like at a specific number of weeks at that visit, like I present something as like, this is just the thing we do at this number of weeks. Because what I found, and I don't know if this is because of where I live in Minnesota, but if I leave it too much up to them, there's this sort of resistance to doing something out of their comfort zone, if that makes sense. So when we're incorporating spirituality or like a ceremony or a meditation or card pulling or any of that, I think when we had talked about this even last month or something, Maren, you were like, oh, I just kind of give people two choices a lot of the time. Like, oh, today we're doing this or that. Which one do you want to do? Instead of like leaving it too open, because people do need direction. And as the midwife, I need a little bit of like structure, but not in the way that we think of midwifery being structured. Not like, oh, today we're going to do these labs. It's like, oh, I'm going to give them sort of this menu of options for, you know, this spiritual exploration, emotional exploration, and see what they pick from that. Because I think at the end of the day, it's not so much about the exact thing we do or the tool or the ceremony. It's more just like creating that space to see what bubbles up, and then going from there, because without making that space, it's really easy. And again, I'm in Minnesota, where people are very like, you know, we're the land of like the stoic Norwegians. I think even the cool people that I work with would be so happy to just like get in and be like, oh, the weather, it's snowing again. And then like measure their belly and be on their way. Like, so even though they want it, and like when they write things down about what they want and need for their pregnancy, they do acknowledge like, oh, I'd really like this to feel more spiritually connected. They're not always going to come in and be like, you know, I really want to get after this. So anyways, just putting it out there is how this might look, even as a doula, right?
What questions do people have, and or other topics? I feel like there's so many things that there has to be some more direction here. We're like a prenatal that's just open for discussion. While you're thinking about it, perhaps a question will come in. And I think you kind of hit on this already, Margot, but it's important to maybe repeat that my reasoning, at least, for thinking about prenatal care in this way is really because it does affect the birth and the mothering experience so much. So this isn't about like being a cool hippie midwife that like doesn't have to do all the shit because she's not licensed. Like, this isn't about us, although it's nice to have the, you know, freedom to do that. The real reason is that I've seen it really affects how powerful women feel. And you could work with someone that early in their pregnancy really has a long way to go for one reason or another, you know, like women, right? Giving power away all the time, people pleasing, like these are the things that all of us have to some degree. And if you're able to work with that in your in the women you're serving, they just end up feeling so like they can do anything. And so it's less about, again, not doing things. It's more about making really powerful mothers that when they're on the other side, when they're holding that baby, they know themselves. Even if they've never had a baby before, they know themselves to a higher degree, perhaps. And, you know, that doesn't mean that maybe their birth experience was even exactly what they wanted. It's not like guaranteeing this perfect birth, but I think it is ensuring that this woman gets to know her own power. And that's how we feel the best, right? In life, whether it's birth or whatever, if we feel powerful in something, then we're good and we can kind of deal with what life throws us. So I love seeing that in these women. I love seeing that the work they do, because it's not work I can do. I cannot do it for them, any of it. I can't have the baby. I can't do the work. And I love seeing them, on the other side, figuring it out as really powerful women. So that's more about why this feels important to me.
Can I just read this one that came in way early on? That again, just, maybe if someone's hopping on midway, or even if they're not, just to again come back to like why this topic is so important. This was from Vanessa, sort of back at the top of the hour. She said, "Hello, Vanessa from Arizona. I am a new midwife and have done all of my training through Meek schools and apprenticeship. I am now exploring what natural birth really looks like, and I'm doing it through not taking the NARM and not getting my license. I am now wondering and dreaming of what prenatals can really look like as I weed through the check boxes of what I was taught. Take what I need, leave the rest." So I think that's just really important. And, without putting words in your mouth, Vanessa, like that is the current state of midwifery, is everything is very much a checkbox and a flow chart. And there's not a lot of critical thinking that goes on, especially from the perspective that Meek schools are teaching, which is just like deplorable. And I meant to write like a novel about why Meek is just the worst ever, and I have like 100 tabs still open from that project and I just haven't done it. But you can just take my word for it, they're just the worst of the worst. It's like bureaucracy under bureaucracy. It's just so ridiculous what is happening with midwifery education. So I won't say more about that, but that's the setting that we're finding ourselves in here in current modern midwifery. And that's why this conversation is so important. Yeah, I heard again today that this other midwife in my town has been telling other people like, oh, if my name comes up, like, oh, she's uncertified, right? And I'll be like, yeah, and you're a terrible midwife, right? But like, whatever. It's just so obnoxious when like we're having these conversations. So like, how do we really help women find their power and give them true informed choice? And like regular midwifery over here is just like, better get them to pee on that stick or fire them for being non-compliant. That's the end of my rant. We have some questions over here.
I mean, I would say that I think the basic structure for mainstream midwifery, it's okay. I mean, I could shoot it down on some days all day, but I'm saying that like the basics of it is fine. It's fine to learn those things. So again, it's such a nuanced discussion, because it can easily be taken as like, oh, prenatal care is just like holding a meditation. And it's like, I don't think that. I mean, I think if you're going to be a midwife, then you've got to know the stuff and you've got to have it in the back of your brain, and you don't need to like bring it forward all the time. Like people have mentioned preeclampsia, like, you're not like screening people out loud, for heaven's sakes, but it's like you should know what that is and what signs might appear. But this sort of like more beautiful, I think, vision of midwifery is adding on to that, and adding on in a unique way for you if you're the midwife, so that we are not all doing it the same. And hence, and this comes back to a lot of things I've said about this Elevate program. We're not in competition with each other. If all of us were in the same city, we'd all be unique enough and confident enough in our own ways of offering this that it's not a problem. But we're not there yet, obviously. So
many questions over here. Holy moly.
where do we start?
I think you addressed it, but someone asked like what, I think this is what you were speaking to, like what does an appointment actually look like then? So if it differs from woman to woman and time to time. First of all, I would say that I have this really fun series, and it's not okay. So I have a series. What is it even called? But it's on my podcast, Midwifery for the People. And I think there's 4 or 5 of them, maybe even, where I do virtual prenatals and they're recorded. So you can listen to what it actually sounds like when I do a virtual prenatal with somebody. They're really cool. And, they're also really useful for if somebody reaches out with similar questions. Like one was preconception after multiple miscarriages. One was counseling a woman who had hypertension with her first pregnancy and she was pregnant again. Those kinds of like specific things. So definitely go check that out on the podcast archives. That's obviously different than what one would look like in person in the flesh, but it might give you an idea of what some of those conversations can sound like. And then, without getting like way into it, like my prenatals loosely look like a lot of talking, like just, kind of processing the stuff, like the homework that they've had in between sessions. And then at the end, asking which clinical things they would like, talking through options that are specific to their gestation, and then setting them on their way. But like I said, I'm in an experimentation phase of working in some of the other pieces more and doing it sort of like I said, offering it as like, this is what we're doing today. Here's the couple options and you pick from one. And that would be something I do at the beginning.
Yeah, I do typically start with some kind of grounding exercise. And again, that's not, it is purposeful. Let's put it that way. It is purposeful to kind of get someone into their body, into the space, and whatever the focus of the meditation is, which is sort of random and maybe intuitive or whatever I kind of am feeling at that moment for that person. And usually when they are permitted to like sit in that quiet space and have that guidance and it's not rushed, and I'm talking 10-15 minutes at most, it really opens up the conversation in a different way. Like I've had people just start crying spontaneously after meditations because it really brought something in for them that like they would not have shared otherwise, because it's just an awkward environment, right? To like walk into a room and like, hi, how are you? And sit down and talk about all these deep things. I mean, some people will do it just depending on their personality. But again, like the nervous system aspect is really important. Can we teach women, if they don't already know, how to be in their bodies, how to feel what they're feeling? If they can't sit and feel the emotions they're feeling easily, something like labor might be a real challenge. And again, it's also connecting our nervous system. So we're going to do that in Elevate, and you're going to be able to feel how that feels for everybody in the room, your assistant, this pregnant woman, to be connected in that way, because we are mammals and having a nervous system connection is really important for trust and, all of that good stuff. So that is a standard part of how I do it. Although if I do home visits, which I do as well, I don't typically do that there. I kind of roll with it a little bit more. But again, back to our Elevate program and kind of setting the space and kind of making it the way you want it to go in a way, if you're the midwife, so that it's kind of feeling consistent.
What's your advice for birth workers wanting to offer radical prenatal care, but living in an area where this type of care is not what is expected or desired? Just coming from a place of not knowing about these types of options. Right. My suggestion is to teach and educate your community. Like, it's your number one job. And that goes back to kind of like the heart of all of our our approach to business building as well. So it serves many, many purposes, but teaching in your community is the best thing that you can possibly do. I was just on the phone with somebody yesterday in sort of like a hybrid money birth worker conversation. She was actually a money client of mine because I do that. And that's something that I'm going to be focusing on in the Elevate program. But we just did a call about that the other day, so I'm not going to say anymore. Anyways, one of her questions was around getting more doula clients. And I was like, well, and she did our doula training, which we have, if you didn't know that, the Doula Academy. It's very good. And she said that she had taught our training, our workshop, I should say, that we give to our doula students. And we also give to our midwifery students to like just plug and play, teach in their communities if they want to. she had taught that 3 different times. And the first time she had no one come. And she said she had tried to like do the wording herself. The second time and the third time she used the wording like exactly how we give it to you in this little package, like exactly what to put on your Facebook post and how to describe your event. And she had 12 people come the first time and 15 people come the second time in her small town. So that's pretty decent. For like maybe $10 of advertising that she had to do. Anyways, I was like, well, I think you should probably teach it again. When can you teach it again? And she was like, oh, you know, like, you're right. That's what I need to do. Like, that's the answer. I got tons of people out. Why would I not just keep doing it? Other than it feels like you should make it more complicated. It doesn't need to be complicated. Like, just teach your community, hold circles, or just do the same thing every 2 months in the same exact space, because that's the really crazy part about birth work. Like, the people that we're trying to target turn over every month, right? Like, there are new pregnant people every single month, no matter where you live. And so we have to continue to teach. It can't be something you do like once a year. That's not really how to like make an impact in your community. The first year that I was here in Duluth, I taught 13 different workshops. And so doing something basically once a month, and then once I did it twice a month. And that was how I initially built like a base of support in a community who was interested in my work in a brand new place that I had never lived as an adult. And so again, it doesn't have to be rocket science, but that would be my advice for if you want to offer radical prenatal care, but people don't know what it is or they don't think they want it. You got to teach them about what's going on, where they live, and show them the value of this work. And there's a ton of different ways to do it. But like I said, our students get access. And I'm guessing we would offer this to the people in the Elevate program. What do you think, Maren? I would assume so. You know, we offer this sort of plug and play option so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And you could literally just teach that same exact thing, as long as you don't get bored and like fall asleep teaching it or something. But you could teach that same exact thing over and over again where you live. I've also done, or like Maren and I did, like you said, a workshop specifically on radical prenatal care. I've done that here in Duluth too, but usually people don't turn out for that. So my quick advice is, if you want to offer that, you need to teach them about the birth part first, because that's the part people think they need to know the most about. So teach about birth, sneak in the radical prenatal care once they get that initial piece figured out.
The question about timing of prenatals, I think, is up for debate, of course. I think we're all familiar with the mainstream schedule, right, of every month until about 28 weeks, and then it's every 2 weeks, and then it's supposed to be every week the last month. I think it's a fine schedule for different reasons, right? Like, that schedule is based on testing options, and yeah, God forbid you missed someone with preeclampsia. Like, it's a very, very medicalized reasons why that schedule is the way it is. And you don't have to do that much digging to kind of like learn about prenatal care and why it is the way it is. In fact, there are a couple of podcasts in the archives from way back when I did that digging. So you don't even have to do the digging. Go listen to the podcasts. But the schedule itself, I don't have a problem with, and I do generally follow that. And if someone wants more, that's great. If someone, you know, especially the last month of pregnancy, they don't really feel like seeing you every week, they're just enjoying their life, and you know, the baby will come when it comes, then I don't need to go do that every week. It really is based on what people need and want. And the same with the postpartum care schedule, right? It's like, we don't need to see each other just to say we did. Let's save the visits for when they might feel useful, is how I feel about it. But I, of course, you know, let people decide what they want. And I feel like I have so much interaction with these women in between visits. I mean, I only have 1 or 2 people a month. So, you know, it's nothing crazy. And usually I'm talking to them a lot in between. So, you know, I think it changes in a way, seeing them personally. I mean, it's great, but there are other ways too. Let's see, just like last few minutes here. I see people asking about differences in religious faiths for prenatal care, and I don't have a preference there. Women are free to, and I think often, well, at least in this neck of the woods, that could be the case, that someone would prefer a Christian midwife, which I am not. However, I have many Christian clients, and I've had women of all kinds of faiths and practices, from ayahuasca to Vedic masters. Like, there's been a lot of variety in there, and I find it really fun. And as someone said, I'm not in that case, of course, assuming anything. I'm open to being taught. I'm open to participating in what's important to them. It's not about pushing your protocol or your meditation or your whatever. As Margot shared, I have a really long questionnaire I send people. So I ask them openly, what are your beliefs? What do you want? Is this okay? Is this not okay? Are you open to exploring? So I have that information going in, which, hopefully limits anything that's super awkward. But again, I've not had an issue. And, long story short, in my apprenticeship, I saw that as well. And I remember one of my mentor midwives saying, whatever faith a woman is, when you're with her, that's what you are too, to a certain extent, right? Like, you just honor that. You're just with that. You don't question that. It just is. So if people are going to say, whatever, a prayer to Jesus in their labor, I'm going to say it with them. I don't have a problem with that, because to me, it's actually all the same anyways, right? It's God, love, Buddha, Jesus, whatever you're going to say. So I'll save that for some other Zoom call, but that's how I feel.
Barron's Church.
Yeah. The
You're
Church of the New
invited.
Birth right here.
That's funny.
Vanessa, just briefly, we are going to talk about that in Elevate. So it feels like that might be a really good match for you, but we could talk privately about that as well. But that's a huge part, I think, of deciding how to do that, where to do that, when to do that. And I've kind of done all of it over the years, and I definitely have thoughts and preferences myself. But I think there are important things to consider in this discussion of, supporting a woman the way she wants to be supported, setting the energy, including the family. Like, there's a lot of things that we have to think about on our end that people wouldn't know to think about. So that's what we're going to be doing there in Elevate.
I just wanted to also piggyback on that and say that there's some comments over here from Ashley. Like, if I taught in my community, I'd be run out of town. The midwives here are vicious. I've been attacked for less. And what do you think about doing this in California with the worst legislation for midwifery ever? So those are totally things that we would get into and Elevate. The short answer is there, and we've got tons of content if you want to look back on other Zooms, full and new moon Zooms. We also have an entire course called The Beginner's Guide to Radical Midwifery. But there's no magic wand to make anyone protected anywhere. And like, there are different realities in different places. Someone's asking what Elevate is, so we should probably say what it is before we go. But basically my like kind of like mean big sister response, but which is actually kind of a nice thing, but might feel like a mean big sister response, is do it fucking anyways. Like, the longer that we put up with this bullshit, the longer it's going to continue. Like, women have to stop letting them tell us what we can do. And so even if that means moving, if there's somewhere that you would need to be to feel safer or whatever, like, consider doing that. I guess I'm just saying, like, there cannot be there's not a silver bullet. There's not something we can do to make it better. Even having a better law would not make it better. So we have to just stand in our power and educate our communities. And so, like, again, going back to that, they cannot do anything to you for teaching. They cannot do anything for holding a class about undisturbed birth, teaching about how birth works. Like, those things you are allowed to teach about, as far as I'm aware, in all 50 US states. The only time I've ever heard of someone being told that they were not allowed to teach about birth was a friend of ours in Australia. And that was insane. And she went to law school as a result. And that's a story for another day. But that's the only time I've ever heard of such a thing. And so please don't let, what is it? Don't let the bastards get you down, right? Handmaid's Tale, anybody? Like, we cannot let them. We cannot perpetuate the story anymore. So that's my mean big sister loving approach to answering that question.
I love it. And to wrap that up, I think in this realm of prenatal care actually really makes sense, because again, we're talking about a focus on the woman where she accepts full responsibility for her experience. So again, it's baby steps in every direction. Instead of focusing on midwifery legislation, why aren't we focusing on women and how powerful they are, and the fact that, you know, they can do this, we can do this. It's all setting us up for a different world where people remember that they're free and they remember that they're sovereign. And, you know, again, maybe it's harsh, but they have to take responsibility for themselves. So these are baby steps maybe towards that, rather than, having these like bigger discussions of like, where can I go and do this? There are so many things you can do. You could share this Zoom call. You could share the one from 2 weeks ago about midwifery licensing sucking really bad. So there's so many ways to start spreading the word, the education, the information, and forming a solid community that just doesn't put up with, you know, like Margot's saying, kind of the bullshit of the patriarchal world that wants to tell us how we're going to do this, because that's unacceptable. I will not be told how to do this, whether I'm the midwife or the mother. Not happening. So perhaps you feel the same. Lastly, if you're on YouTube especially, there are some videos on YouTube from a long time ago, Margot and I palpating each other's bellies, all kinds of fun, old, weird stuff. There's lots of old podcasts on the archive link about all of this. What is the testing for? What is prenatal care? What is clinical care? How do I find a midwife who doesn't serve the state? All of these topics are there in the archives and they're all free to listen to. So I think that kind of sums it up. And we don't have the new schedule done yet for the next Zoom and the next 6 months. We'll do the whole 6 months probably in a chunk. So I don't know what the topic will be in another 2 weeks for the new moon, but I'm sure you'll see it out there and about.
We're always taking requests too over on the social platform. If you want to chime in with what you'd like, you could also message us there. I'm going to put that in the chat too, social.indiebirth.org. That's where we have many thousands of women like you talking about these things and supporting each other. You can also email us, margot@indiebirth.org or marin@indiebirth.org. And then I know we're over time, but did you say more about Elevate? I was like typing stuff over in there.
I didn't. I put the link there. So if you're on YouTube, it's indiebirth.org/elevate. You can check it out and certainly ask us questions. It's a new program we have for midwives that are doing this work, whether you're a new midwife, an older midwife, someone that's been a CNM, like who cares where you're coming from. If you're interested in essentially like elevating your work and your soul's mission here on earth as a midwife, then we'd love to have you. And we're going to talk about so many things like we did tonight along these lines and more. Like there's so much more. So it's a 6-week program. We'll be meeting twice a week live. Those will all be recorded. And I think one of the most important parts of it is creating a community. Midwives are notoriously like toxic and not in community with each other. There's a lot of ickiness and backstabbing. We really are tired of it. But this isn't for everybody. So midwives that feel that way probably won't do this. So if you do, you'll be in good company of a sisterhood where we can have these discussions in this kind of circle and make each other, better and happier in this work we do. That's the goal. So even if you're not a midwife, we'd love if you shared the link. Maybe you have a midwife and you're like, this would be perfect for her. Send it along, please.
Yes. If you like us, please do that. next time you have 5 minutes, send the link to a midwife that you know and love and say, oh my gosh, this looks like something that would be so helpful for you, maybe. And that's all you would need to say. Something quick and easy, and it would help us a lot, and it would help them too, possibly.
Lastly, if people do have an extra minute here, you can let us know in the chat even if there are topics for future moon gatherings like this that you'd like. Otherwise, we'll come up with them just based on what we know about our community. But we welcome that as well. So you can type it in quick or you can email us later, but anything is open, any kind of topic from stuff a pregnant woman would want, because we're kind of like simultaneously always talking to two groups, women as a whole, and then more specifically midwives and student midwives. But otherwise, we will leave you for your evening. And so much gratitude for being here and caring about all of this. It means a lot to us, for sure.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. See you soon.